All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Zach Klein. And I'm on the communications team here at Conrad Siegel. And we're here to talk about 401k plans today. We're going to talk about 7 simple steps we can make to improve our 401k plans. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and get us started. Just go over some quick logistics for the call today. So let me go ahead here. And again, we are on Zoom webinar today, so we can't see or hear you, but we do want it to be interactive, right? Want the conversation to be interactive. And so feel free to submit questions through the chat button at the bottom of your screen. We'll be monitoring those. And I will go ahead and introduce our speakers for today and work on handing it off to them. Just a quick note on continuing education. We are offering 1 continuing education credit for both SHRM and HRCI. So just hang on until the end of the webinar. There'll be a survey that pops up. You can indicate what continuing education you're looking to receive, and we'll coordinate all of that with you afterwards. But for today's speakers, we've got a nice lineup to really cover the full spectrum of a retirement plan, right? First, we've got Tara Mashak-Bainey. Tara is a partner and president of investment advisory services here at Conrad Siegel. She oversees the firm's investment consulting for all types of retirement plans, but primarily defined contribution 401k plans. Then we have Scott Gaiman. Scott is a retirement plan consultant, and he specializes in retirement plan design, consulting for all 401k type plans and ESOPs as well. And then we've got Brian Graff. Brian's an employee communications specialist. Brian oversees our retirement communications and works directly with participants in our plans to help those people save for retirement. So if you have a plan with Conrad Siegel, there's a good chance that your staff's interacted with Brian at some point. So like I said, we've got professionals, experts to cover kind of the full spectrum of the retirement plan. So if you've got questions today, this is the right group. Feel free to send those in. But I want to just jump right into the content here and hand it over to our experts. So with that, I'll welcome on Tara to get us started today.
Great. Thanks so much, Zach. Good morning. I certainly appreciate everyone's time this morning. And I am going to kick it off today with the first step, and that is creating and maintaining a fiduciary file cabinet, which frankly is just another way of saying be organized. And you might be saying to yourself, Tara, that's really basic. Yes, it is, but we are all so busy doing everything that we need to do. I find that sometimes the obvious, can be overlooked. So, I think we need to take a step back and remember what our fiduciary responsibility is, right? From an investment standpoint, that is not picking the investment that has the absolute positive best performance. It is about having a prudent process in place that's well documented, and for always making decisions that are in the participant's best interest. So what we have up on the screen for you are a couple of things that we think you should consider maintaining in a file all together so that it's organized and that you can easily refer back to it. Obviously, we'll start with contracts, service provider agreements, your investment policy statement, which is the foundation for selecting and monitoring your investments, reports that you get from vendors, including any of your committee meeting minutes. And a side note here on meeting minutes, these really are meant to capture the decisions made at the committee that you don't want to forget about. One thing from an investment standpoint that we recommend be in these minutes are any fund changes and the reasons, the rationale, kind of the who, what, when, and why that go around the decision to replace the investments. I recently had a client reach out to me and they asked for some help in completing their fiduciary liability insurance application. And one of the questions that they were asked is, list all of the fund changes that occurred in the plan over the last 6 years. I first saw that and thought, oh my heavens, where am I going to go for that? And then quickly remembered the file cabinet and the meeting minutes, right? We have all of those minutes organized for the client. And really, we were able to quickly go back and pull that information. Along with another item that shows there, annual fee review and benchmarking. This application also asked for kind of participant fee disclosures, and all of that was there. So it really made filling out that application an easy process. Kind of back to the cabinet, you want to make sure that once you have that investment policy statement in writing, you want to make sure that you have proof that you're following that. So your vendor reports that, circle back to that document, or if someone's doing that in-house, you want to make sure that you have the documentation to support the review of that. And, the last two items that appear there are somewhat new based on some things that we see going on in the industry. The first is, a review of cybersecurity information. The DOL came out not that long ago with some best practices for your vendors and providers. And we want to make sure that you're getting that information and reviewing it at a committee level, being confident that the vendors are indeed keeping your participant data secure and taking the right steps. And it's great to, again, house that documentation along with the other things you see on the screen. And lastly, as a committee member, right, your responsibility is to be engaged and to seek understanding, not to necessarily be an investment expert, but to have a good solid foundation. So what better way to do that and to prove that is to house your fiduciary training materials and resources along with the other items on the screen. Now, you might be asking yourself, why is all of this important? What benefits am I going to receive out of it? Well, by having all that information packaged together, it really represents a great educational tool. When you have a new committee member come on board, you should, point them in the direction of this file cabinet pretty early on. One, you want to make sure that they get up to speed as quickly as possible so that they can contribute to future investment committee meetings. Secondly, you want there to be some continuity and consistency in decision making when new members are brought on board. So what better way than for them to have access to review what was done in the past? In addition, by just being organized, it saves time. I just went over that example of, filling out that application. By knowing exactly where things are, it really helps in making some efficient and effective decisions. You want to identify if there are any holes. You don't want an audit or two. So for instance, when you have everything laid out, if you meet quarterly, you have 3 sets of minutes, but not the 4th. You want to be able to find that and fill that in before an examiner or an auditor asks for all of your meeting minutes. Then you realize one is missing and you need to kind of scramble to fill the hole as quickly as possible. And kind of the last point on, I think, the necessity for the file cabinet is, I mentioned earlier that you want to have as a fiduciary a prudent process, but it needs to be documented. I mean, what better way to prove that you have that process than by having all of that documentation and having all of that documentation organized? Always reminds me of something that actually happened here at Conrad Siegel to me personally about 15 years ago. We are an SEC registered investment advisory firm. And as such, one of the files that we need to maintain is a file on customer complaints. So we had an examiner come in and ask to see our complaints. I was proud to tell them that we don't have any customer complaints. They said, great, can we see your file? I said, we don't have one. They said, why not? I said, we don't have any customer complaints. Why would we need a file? And he's like, well, it's all about the proof. How can you prove that you don't have any customer complaints unless you have an empty file? So what you should have had, Tara, was an empty file showing me that, hey, I know I need one, but there's no complaint, so that's why it's empty. Because like as it stands now, I don't know whether or not to believe you, or you could have simply forgotten about that process and pitched the complaints and not handled it properly. So that kind of ingrained in me a few years ago the need to prove that you're doing the right thing. Just doing the right thing isn't sufficient enough. All right, so where do you go from here if you don't have that file already in place, or if your provider's not maintaining one for you? Well, you want to pull everything together that we just had on the previous screen, and there might be some other things from an organization that are unique to you that make sense to have in that file as well. Do suggest at this point that file cabinet is electronic. I think we're all, to some extent, working virtually. So it's just more convenient, easily accessible by all committee members if that file cabinet is electronic. If you find that you do have any paper files, agreements, you might want to scan those and add them to what you already have electronically. Look to see what holes exist and work on filling them, and know that your provider can help you with that. Something that I see often missing are vendor agreements. If you've been with your vendor for 5, 10, 15 years, you might not have been around when they were originally hired, that original agreement. So want to make sure that you track that down. Feel free to reach out to vendors for help in filling out the cabinet. Once you have it created, it's a lot easier to maintain. So make sure that at least annually you take a step back, see what needs to be added to it. And as a reminder, it's a great tool for new committee members. So make sure that you are using it. And again, I go back to our fiduciary responsibility of having that prudent process, making sure that it's documented, going through these steps. Having that file cabinet is a great way to make sure that you're meeting that fiduciary responsibility. As we move on to kind of the next step, we'll be taking a look at goals. And I'm going to approach this from an investment standpoint. I think we'll hear from Scott and Brian in a few minutes, where they take a look at some plan design and participant education goals. But I'm going to focus in on the investments. I always tell my clients that when we are all on the same page, we have the committee members and you have the partners or vendors, all rowing in the same direction, we get much further. Well, we can't do that unless we have clarity around the goals. We make sure that the goals are appropriate, and we make sure that we periodically revisit those goals. While the fiduciary file cabinet, it might make sense to every year take a look at that and make sure we have everything buttoned up. From a goal perspective, may make sense annually, may make sense every 3 or 5 years. I'm going to share some stories with you that I think represent a good time to look at certain goals that you have for the investment program. The first I'll start with by saying, as a committee, don't hesitate to admit that you don't know what the goals are. I had a new client a few years ago come to me and say, that they were a relatively new committee. There's been some turnover, and they weren't part of decisions that were made previously. So they really had no idea why the menu looked the way it did. And you could tell because they were confused when looking at, performance reports and information on the usage of the menu, and they didn't know how to make decisions going forward. So we really took a step back with this client and started from scratch, looked at a few things on the slide, started obviously with the size of the investment menu, used what was currently in place as a good starting point. We added our kind of perspective on what we see as best practices in the industry, and then ask some questions of them on how they felt, the feedback that they were getting from participants. So for instance, the size of the menu, we went in and said, average is about 10 or 15 funds, which is where you're at. They were hearing kind of good things from a participant perspective. So without making a change, we basically acknowledged that what they had made sense. And, that was a goal going forward, to have a menu size of about 10 to 15 funds, because we wanted to offer participants enough for diversification, but not too many funds so as to cause confusion. Second story kind of relates to another client who is with an existing record keeper who was just bought by another record keeper. So now they are basically changing providers, kind of forced to. Represents a great time to not only look at the menu, but look at the programs that the new provider has, and see if there are any changes that make sense and you want to implement going forward. For instance, I noticed with this particular situation, the current provider had very limited, cash preservation options. So money market stable value, they really only had 2 options to choose from. With the new provider, they have about 20 options to choose from. So while the existing option was meeting criteria in the policy statement, performing in line with benchmark and peers, now their options have opened up incredibly. It makes sense to review the goals for that particular asset class, review what's available, and either confirm that what you're in makes the most sense going forward, or perhaps it's an appropriate time to make a change. The third area, or the third time perhaps it's good to kind of reset the goals, or just paying attention to what's going on in the industry. If I look back over the last couple of years, the lawsuits against plan sponsors have primarily been focused on high fees, whether it be from a record keeper or from an investment standpoint. While those lawsuits are still going on, we're starting to see more of an interest in the qualified default, which for many is the suite of target retirement date funds, right? The suits are claiming that there are more appropriate options out there. When I first started at Conrad Siegel, target retirement date funds were just in the infancy, right? They were just getting started. Now, 20 years later, there's a wealth of suites out there that have different glide paths, that have different investment philosophies and styles. So one of the things that we're going to be working through with all of our clients next year is a thorough review of not only their existing qualified default, but looking to see what other options have become available since they chose that suite of target date funds or investment portfolios that they're in. Part of that prudent process is not just reviewing what you have, but reaffirming what you have makes the most sense. And the last area I have up there is watch list process. I think we're all aware that, again, looking at what's going on in the industry, the markets, the stock markets, the bond markets, extremely volatile. I think that has caused many committees to revisit how quickly they change a fund that's underperforming, and perhaps based on what's going on, they want to be a little bit more conservative, take their time. So we've kind of adjusted their watch list process or fund change process. So just like the fiduciary file cabinet, why is all of this important? I recognize that you all are extremely busy. So again, thank you for your time today. But by taking a step back and by having clarity around the goals and by being organized with all of your materials, really trying to set up the committees to work as efficiently as possible, be able to make decisions as quickly as possible. And you'd be surprised at, by just having that focus and organization, how much of a time saver it really is. And again, circling back to the fiduciary's ultimate responsibility of having a prudent process, having that documentation, making sure that they're making decisions in the participants' best interest, to be organized, to be thinking about your goals, to be revisiting your goals, I think are just a great way to make sure that you are meeting your fiduciary responsibility. So thank you for your time and interest in that section of the presentation. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Scott to talk a little bit about plan design.
Thank you, Tara. First of all, I echo Tara's comments. Thank you so much for being with us today. We know you're busy, and so we really appreciate your joining us to talk about some of these steps you can take in order to improve your 401k plan. And what we wanted to give you were some actionable things that maybe if you couldn't even snap your fingers and make them happen overnight, you could at least maybe get started on developing some kind of a plan to affect some changes if that was a goal of yours. And so, that plays nicely into this, because there's certain things that you can do with your 401k plan that, you might not be able to accomplish right away, but if you can start taking that first step towards improvement, and can do a whole lot for your plan in the long term. And that one of those things is getting to that magic 15%. Now, I can't see you all, but I imagine if I asked you to raise your hands, there's probably a lot of you that have heard of this magic 15%. This was kind of the rule of thumb for years that I've been hearing for a long, long time, probably at least 15, 20 years of being at Conrad Siegel. Just this idea that a good, solid, rough cut estimate of how much a participant should be saving for retirement across all types of money, employer and employee and such, is around 15%. That should give you a reasonable chance of achieving a good retirement outcome in the long term. And I stress the long term in this regard. So a lot of plan sponsors kind of have that in the back of their heads. Some of them actually have that in their heads when they design their plans or provide education. But there's some very good reasons to be thinking about this now. And one of those is the big bubble of baby boomers that are at retirement age, and some of which may have actually had to delay retirement a little bit because of the current economy and such. But it's definitely a timely topic. Something I have up here on the slides that it's very difficult to quantify, and it may not be something you've actually thought of, but it's very important to think about, is there is actually a cost to having employees who are not able to retire when they want to. And that cost manifests itself in different ways, and none of them are easy to measure. It's probably almost as difficult to measure as new business gained by going to networking events over 10 years. Trust me, I know that one well as well. But there is that cost of having employees who are not able to retire when they want to. And that cost might emerge as a PR issue. You have participants who all they have is Social Security. They go out, they tell their friends in the community, and that reflects poorly on the employer when it may actually be their fault. They didn't save in their retirement plan, didn't take advantage of it, but they still talk. So that's one way. Another way is just, you have somebody who is still working who really would prefer not to. They're working out of necessity. They may not be operating as efficiently as they'd like, or as you would like. So there's all kinds of issues associated with that. I encourage everyone to think about that, because that could really affect your bottom line. And you're probably never going to be able to tie a direct a relationship between the two, but it could show up there. So that's one reason that this is a timely topic. And another is some models nowadays consider 15% as the employee contribution target. Forget employer contributions. Let's go for 15% from the employees. And why might that be the case? Well, I'm listing some of those reasons there that you could logically conclude are going into that rationale. But rising healthcare costs, inflation, longevity, mid-career employees who maybe just haven't saved that much to this point. Those are some reasons that some of these models are considering no longer taking employer contributions into account. They're looking at employee contributions as the target. So that's why you should care. But there's a few ways you can take that first step. And so we're going to talk about those here. And here's where I want to get a little bit more into the meat of some of this. There's many ways you can go about getting to that magic 15%, as I call it. And again, I'll stress, none of these are going to happen overnight. It's an easy change you can make in that you can take that first step, maybe take a look at your goals. Tara talked a lot about goal setting and sort of clarifying where, as a retirement committee, you want the plan to go. Whether that be you want to give everyone a chance to achieve a secure retirement outcome. Give everyone that opportunity. Maybe that's a goal. It's a very good goal. But then here's some ways that you can maybe start going down the road of getting there. Some of them might require plan design changes, but some of them might be a little less difficult to implement. It may just involve taking advantage of resources that are already available. So one thing you could do, and you have to be careful how you go about this, but one thing you could do is you could consider stretching your matching contribution. And I've seen some employers do this over the years. The one hurdle you have to get over is it might seem a little bit like a benefit takeaway because people have to contribute more to get the same match. But just for example, if you're currently matching 25 cents on the dollar up to the first 4%. So basically for that first 4% the employee puts in, you're matching $1 or 25 cents on the dollar on that first 4%. So 25%, or I'm sorry, 50 cents on the dollar for that first 4%. I'm misreading my slide there. If you were to change your matching contribution, so instead of 50 cents on the dollar on the first 4%, a 50% match, you're doing the same match, but the participant has to contribute 8% to get there, and you're doing 25 cents on the dollar. At the end of everything, they're going to have the same contribution, the same employer contribution, but they're going to have contributed a higher level of employee contributions to get that. And so that's a way of encouraging employees to maybe increase their own contributions. But again, there's a little bit of a hurdle there, and that may seem a little bit like a benefit takeaway for those who maybe can't afford to save the full 8%. And a good question came in here. How does stretching the match affect safe harbor plans? Well, the answer is you can't stretch a match in a safe harbor plan. Safe harbor has to be a very there's a very limited extent you could do that. Some plans might match 100% on the first 4%, whereas others can do the 100% on the first 3% and 50% of the next 2%. So there's a little bit of a limited leeway you have there, but with a safe harbor match, matching contribution, you can't do that. Although I will tell you a story here about a plan that is doing a discretionary match in a safe harbor plan that may be helpful. We'll get to that in a minute. Something else you can do is to consider what automatic features could accomplish. And back in the day when these were first introduced, there were a lot of employers out there that were nervous about implementing something where they were essentially requiring they felt like they were requiring a contribution, but really what it was is a participant would be defaulted into a plan at a certain enrolled rate, and they had the opportunity to opt out. But those are becoming a lot more popular, and automatic enrollment in combination with automatic escalation has been more and more of a significant contributor to participants' long-term success in recent years in their retirement savings. So that's something to think about. It's not necessarily for everybody, but I've seen a lot more of that in recent years. Nail that enrollment process, get people an intake. Well, what do I mean by that? Basically, this just means make sure you're getting everyone. And I have seen plans where that process, if Conrad Siegel is not engaged to help with that process, sometimes people do get missed. So, please make sure you're getting everyone. Sometimes if you have a rehire, it makes sense to just call us if we happen to be your service provider and just say, hey, how should I handle this person? But make sure you're getting everyone. And avail yourself of every opportunity to educate participants from the get-go. Whether or not you're automatically enrolling them, that is a great opportunity to hit them up and give them that education and help them get comfortable with the financial decisions that they are making. And that leads to the next point: educate, educate, educate. And that is something Brian's going to talk a little bit more about. But I want to go back to some of Tara's comments about a fiduciary process. And education is there's a very limited presence of education in fiduciary, in the law that governs these plans. From a fiduciary standpoint, you have that limited liability under 404C that just basically makes you spray out information to the participant, not necessarily guaranteeing they're going to read or digest any of it. But we would say that even though the Department of Labor, ERISA, doesn't really require a certain level of education, that plans have some kind of an education policy and really make efforts to educate the participants on how to save more for retirement, on why they should save more, on how to make those investments. And that's a great way to get people to that 15%. So they understand the plan better and are better able to and more comfortable making those kinds of decisions. And finally, up there, talk to your provider about options. That's why we're here. That's why you hire us. Fiduciary process on the investment side, a lot of times plan sponsors, really need to outsource that fiduciary process, just because investments is kind of this murky area that can be difficult to understand unless you have that expertise. But sometimes you feel like you're a little more equipped to succeed with the plan administration and operations and education. You might consider talking to your provider there as well, because there may be some options available to you that you weren't aware that can help you educate your participants. We try to make those options available, but it's easy to forget that these plans are complicated and you have a lot of different tools available to you. It might just be helpful to have a conversation. Hey, what are we doing? What can we do to improve our options here, both in plan design and in education? So I would encourage you to do that as well. Okay, so I think it's time for our first polling question. Polling question number 1. Which methods have you tried to get your employee, let's see, mine's popping up a little bit incomplete there, get your employees to increase their savings rates into the plan? Select all that apply. Have you increased the match? Have you stretched the match, as we talked about? Have you added automatic features? Participant education, something else, or maybe you haven't tried it. So I'll give you a minute to answer that question. And while you're answering that, I'll tell you a quick story that I mentioned before. I did have a plan that they were freezing their defined benefit pension plan, and they were looking to enrich their benefits in their 401k plan. They did that via plan design. So they wanted to get their folks to that 15%. And so they had a safe harbor non-elective 3% contribution into their 401k plan. And so what they decided to do was they decided to implement a 8% match, or I'm sorry, a match based on the first 8% 401k contributed, which doesn't happen to be a safe harbor formula. So they still have to do a little bit of testing there. But they did, they basically ended up doing 50 cents on the dollar of that 8%. So if you take that, you add the 8% 401k to the 4% match to the 3% safe harbor, well, right there you are, 15%. So through plan design, they were able to achieve that. And they also added in automatic enrollment and automatic escalation to help ensure those participants had the maximum advantage in terms of just giving them sort of an automatic way for all this to happen. So that was one of my success stories, and they've been doing that for several years, and they have good savings in that 401k plan. And looking at the results here, which methods have you tried to get your employees to increase their savings rates? We've had some who've played around with the match bit, whether increasing or stretching it, which stretching it doesn't seem to be all that popular. I've only seen that a few times in my career, but it does happen. Automatic features is a big one, and that plays out with how much more frequently I've seen that in recent years. Participant education has also been a big one, and that strongly suggests what Brian's going to talk about here in a few minutes may be helpful as well. So thank you for responding to that question. Okay, then real quick, before we pass the torch to Brian here, I want to talk a little bit about former employee house cleaning. So I thought of a really good analogy. I wish I'd had Zach throw a slide in here on this, but my son and I just went on a backpacking trip over the past weekend. We do that a lot. And those of you who have ever done backpacking, you're basically hiking out in the woods with everything you need to camp on your back. And one of your goals is to get that load as light as possible. Otherwise, it's going to drag you down. You're going to be less efficient. You're going to move slower. You're going to be in more pain when it's all over with. And I thought that was a nice parallel to this slide here, to this idea of former employee house cleaning. I've seen plans out there that have people hanging around who've been there for years. And sometimes there's good reasons for that. You know, sometimes the plan sponsor wants the employees to stay. They feel like, you know, hey, we're giving them all these investment options at a very reasonable cost. Maybe there's a really good reason to continue offering that. If they don't want to touch their money, we don't want to make them take it out. So that's a very valid reason to keep them there. But there's some reasons you also might want to consider cleaning house a bit. Some of them are here on the screen. One very significant thing is if you have a small plan that doesn't require that CPA audit every year, a small plan 5,500, if you let people hang out there too long, you might trip over that 120 life threshold and end up paying more costs to have an audit done every year to file with your 5,500. So that's one very good reason to watch this. But even if you're not in that situation, there's plan costs are often driven by participant counts and assets. Your plan document might require it. Something else to keep in mind, Tara talked a lot about fiduciary obligation and process. Well, anybody who's in this plan is under that fiduciary umbrella. If they leave the plan and roll it to an IRA, you no longer have to worry about them being under that fiduciary umbrella as far as the investments go. So it does increase your risk a little bit. And something else I've seen, a couple other things I've seen, is over time you run into more issues. You run into issues with disputes over divorce and death cases, beneficiaries, incapacity issues, where you have to have powers of attorney floating around, that kind of thing, which drives your costs. And finally, if contact info is not updated, it can be really hard to find people and pay them out. I had this happen with a client we took over, and there was a very good reason that I felt kind of badly for them that they were in this situation. It wasn't their fault, but they had purchased a line of business and basically moved operations. And a lot of folks in the 401k plan were now former employees that had been out there for years. And some of them they had long lost track of. I mean, they had dozens of people that they didn't know where to find them. And so what ended up happening is they sold again and terminated the plan. And so then, of course, Conrad Siegel had to help them find these people. And boy, was that ever fun. We did some address searches that turned up a few folks. We had the client look at beneficiary forms to see if they could reach out to a beneficiary or maybe find somebody on social media. Those were some ways that they tried to contact people. Ultimately, we used the PBGC program to help locate folks and take over some accounts that we couldn't pay out of the plan otherwise. And one thing that was kind of interesting is all this actually uncovered a fraud case where there was apparently somebody who had since been deported, but had been using a fraudulent Social Security number years and years ago. And we ended up mailing information to the correct person who actually owned that Social Security number, but never actually worked for the company. So now what the heck do you do with that? So that was really interesting. So the moral of the story here is there's some excellent reasons to keep track of people. And even if you are one of those employers that wants to keep your folks in the plan, make sure that as soon as those the mail starts coming back, that you are reaching out and trying to keep those addresses up to date. So there's a few things you can do here that I'm going to share now. And Zach, if you wouldn't mind flipping to there we go. So here's some things you can do. And again, these are not things that'll happen overnight, but you can sit down and make a plan to improve things. Use your small balance cash out provision. Some plans have this in place and don't use it because their plan document may not have hard language on it. But the small balances can cost a lot in the long term, as we've seen. Another thing you can do is, even though you're not legally allowed to force out balances over $5,000, that limit is now increasing with pending legislation, possibly. But with larger balances, I've had employers who want to clean the records a bit, just send out forms and see who bites. That might prompt somebody to do something. Something else you can do is offer participants an easy rollover option. That's something we've done at Conrad Siegel, and also a couple of the larger players that also offer IRAs, such as Vanguard, will make a very easy rollover option. Sometimes there's that hurdle of like, okay, well, I don't really know what to do with my money, so I think I'll leave it in the plan for now. Well, if you give them an easy way to get it out of the plan, that can be very helpful. Already mentioned the next one, track them down as soon as the mail comes back. And then finally, talk to your provider about options. This is where, in going through that plan termination, we were able to help the provider come up with some ways to, here's some suggestions for how you might be able to find some of these folks. There's only so much we at Conrad Siegel can do, since they might have more in their records or might have the beneficiary records and such. So those are some things you can do to lighten your load, to make your pack as light as possible, to go back to my initial analogy and such. So excellent. So what I'm going to do now, Hopefully that's giving you a little food for thought for a couple operational and plan design things you can do. I'm going to hand it over to Brian, and he's going to talk more about employee education, which I hinted a little bit at. So Brian, take it from here.
All right, thanks, Scott, and good morning, everybody. I'm very excited to be part of this panel this morning. I can't believe it's November 1st already, right? How did that happen? And I don't know what it's like in your world, but in my world, that changeover from October 31st to November 1st is like the most abrupt change of all, calendar days each year. Literally, when we're not watching sports in my house, the last 2 weeks we've been watching scary movies, getting ready for Halloween. Soon as that calendar flips to November 1st, though, it's the Hallmark Channel 24/7. And I'm not saying I'm the one that turns that on all the time, maybe sometimes a little bit. But I brought that up for a reason, not just to make fun of myself and maybe my TV viewing choices, but I'm going to bring that up again at the end of my portion of the presentation. So don't forget about that Hallmark Channel. More to come in just a few minutes. I've been at Conrad Siegel for about 23 years, and I kind of live, breathe employee education. I love it. I think in most of my 23 years, I've been involved in educating employees in one way, shape, or form. In the last several years, it's all I do. Absolutely love to help, and I think that employee communication is a big part of the package that you provide in your retirement plans to participants. And you can have the best retirement plan in the world. Right, you can have all the best plan provisions. You can have a wonderful fund menu that you're proud of with great performing funds, easy investment options that you feel great about, a website with all the bells and whistles. But none of that really matters, though, right? If your employees don't realize or understand the benefit that you're providing, right? These retirement plans exist for the sole purpose of funding your employees' retirements. It's for them. And, obviously it's important to attract and retain employees, but at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that our people are retiring comfortably when it's time, right? So it is so very important that we educate them, we explain the benefits and features of the plan, get the word out as soon as possible, so that they become engaged, okay? Engagement really is key. You got to be engaged when it comes to education, and that involvement starts with you as the plan sponsor. If you think about it, Conrad Siegel, we want to be involved as well, very much involved. We want to be engaged with your employees, but when they're hired, they don't know us. There's very large likelihood they've never heard of Conrad Siegel or maybe ABC company or your current provider, but they know you. They trust you to give them that paycheck every week or every 2 weeks. So the trust really starts with you, and to the extent that you can be involved in spreading the word about how great this retirement package is, the quicker those employees are going to become engaged and really take an interest in their retirement savings. I always think it's wonderful if you're lucky enough to have that employee at your company that can kind of be an ambassador for the 401k plan, like that maybe 60-something-year-old that can take the young whippersnappers aside and say, when I was your age, I was saving $100 a week, and then I gradually increased, and now I've got $1 million in my account, or whatever they're comfortable sharing. But generally, just to say that I'm going to be comfortable retirement, you got to start now. This is super important. Here's why. So if you have that ambassador at your firm, that's wonderful. Have a group of people there that just know enough about the retirement plan to be dangerous. You should definitely rely on your service providers, your record keepers, your investment advisors to help you, but you should at least know enough to, if somebody comes with a question like, can we borrow from our plan? Be able to tell them yes or no, your plan does or does not have a loan feature. How often can we change our payroll contributions? How do we do that? Make sure somebody knows and they can point them in the right direction, even if it's, contact Conrad Siegel or your current provider. So you definitely want to be involved in this journey that all your participants are on. When it comes to education, we think it's important to survey your employees. You may think you know what's most important to them, financially speaking, in their lives, but maybe you're missing something. So in addition to educating them just about solely the benefits of the retirement plan, maybe they want to learn a little bit about budgeting. Maybe, they're so stretched right now that they can't afford to put in anywhere close to that 15% of pay that Scott talked about earlier. So maybe some budgeting tools or budgeting meetings would be really helpful for them. For others, maybe it's, paying off debt, student loans, whatever the case may be, or, paying for their children's daycare expenses or college education. So make sure you know what's at the forefront of your employees' minds and what we can kind of help you, or your service provider should be able to help you educate them on those various components. And again, offer meetings. I think more important than anything else, that visibility is key. Try and have your providers, get out to your firm, or if that's not realistic, have webinars periodically where you can, engage participants that way. Try different things, try lunch and learns, for example, if it works within your business model. See what kind of participation you're getting there. Try something maybe after hours, if you have employees that want to get their spouse involved or listening in to what's going on. Usually there's in-person meetings that can be offered, virtual webinars, one-on-ones. There's a lot of different things you can try to make sure you're reaching as many employees as you can, once a year, once a quarter, whatever your policy is there. And the last thing I want to point out in this slide, partner with a firm that you trust. Partner with a firm that has a passion for helping your employees and that really shares those same values that you have as an employer. And in talking about, choosing the right partner, like I just said, I kind of beat myself to the punch here, make sure you engage with firms, again, that share your education vision and your overall values. Because if you don't, that relationship might last, what, a year, a couple of years, and pretty soon it's going to become stagnant and maybe even fall apart. So when you hire that service provider, you want to make sure right away that, these people kind of get it. They're thinking the same way I'm thinking about education and making sure our employees know the benefits of this retirement program. Talked about meetings. Make sure you have an education plan and strategy in place. Work with your service providers to make sure you're not only holding meetings, but they're getting targeted messages. They're getting emails sent to them periodically. Really great informational stuffers sent with their quarterly statements. A lot of different ways and touches where you can communicate with your employees, but just make sure you know what's going on. And if you have any concerns or frustrations, reach out to your service and providers and make sure they're helping you develop that plan and strategy. You want to make sure that your record keeper has a comprehensive, user-friendly website full of all kinds of good tools and resources available to your participants. And I think this fourth point on this slide, to me, is probably the most important. Expect some level of visibility from your service providers when it comes to education, and try not to forget about that human element. Right, in this technological world that we all currently live in, where so much is accessible to us online, we're doing Zoom meetings, and we're going to websites for calculators and all kinds of great things, which is all important. But make sure you don't lose touch of the human element. People want a person to go to, right? I'll use my current example of a frustration we have in our kitchen right now is we need to have our faucet replaced. And my wife does not want me anywhere near that, anywhere near plumbing, with good reason. I can't blame her one bit. I really don't want to be near it myself. But what's great is I have a person. I have my local plumber, Jim, that I call and say, Jim, help, can you install this faucet for me? A couple days from now, Jim's going to be out here and he's going to take care of that. And I trust him. I know he's going to get the job done right. We have our automobiles, right? We all want to have that garage or that person we trust to take our vehicle to that's not going to try and upsell us or tell us something wrong with their car that really isn't, just to try and get money out of our pockets. We want that trust. I find the same thing to be true with retirement plans. Your employees want a company or someone that they can call for a second opinion on something, or to make sure that what they're doing is right. Am I in the right fund, or the combination of funds for my age and my retirement planning strategy? Am I saving enough to retire? I mean, yeah, you can use online tools and resources for that, but having that second opinion or that person or people, that team that they trust, is super valuable. So try not to ever forget that human element when it comes to your education strategy. And going back to everything we said, trust is crucial at all levels. You as the employer need to trust your service providers are providing an education that is up to your standards for your employees, and your employees need to trust the people they're talking to, making sure they're not trying to sell them something and they're really helping them work towards their personal retirement goals, whatever they are. Okay. And finally, on my last slide here, keep the message simple. All right, so let's now finally, to go full circle here, go back to that Hallmark Channel reference I made earlier on when I started talking. So the reason that I admittedly enjoy watching the Hallmark Channel is because it's simple, right? The formula is the same all the time. You know, two people meet, there's some drama along the way, there's usually some sort of misunderstanding, but inevitably at the end, they get back together and they have that kiss under the mistletoe on Christmas Eve, right? The same formula, it's simple. You can pick up a movie halfway through and watch it to the end. You don't have to watch the whole thing. And sometimes I love that simplicity in my life, right? Life is stressful. Work, your situation at home, your family, your kids, we have a lot of stress throughout our day. Having something simple like the Hallmark Channel is a wonderful luxury. And when I approach employee education, I try and keep that in mind, the Hallmark Channel in mind. And I want to keep my messaging simple, right? Let's not bog down people with the details. Let's say what we want to say quick, make it easy, fill it with warm and fuzzies, make them feel good about this journey they're on, and don't overwhelm. Keep the message simple. Okay. All right, so for the final portion of our presentation, we are going to just talk about some benchmark considerations. I'm going to start off and then hand it over to Tara. And benchmarking can mean a bunch of different things. When Tara's talking about her funds and we mentioned benchmarking, she may be benchmarking performance versus, similar funds in its category. When Scott talks about benchmarking, maybe he's talking about your plan's participation rate compared to like similar companies in your industry. With employee communications, I think the best way to benchmark is to set your own goals, work with your service provider, and check in year to year and see if you're meeting those goals that you set for yourself. So some examples are, how many employees are signing up for and attending events, those group meetings or virtual webinars? Are you getting the type of attendance you expected? If not, what type of adjustments do you need to make? Can you incentivize things a little bit? Can you offer a free lunch? Or make sure people are paid and on the clock during those meetings, or again, maybe having them after hours so people, it's not cutting away from their work days, but maybe offer like a gift card, a $25 gift card to a random attendee from Amazon, things like that to really try and get people excited about participating. Make sure then you measure the satisfaction levels after those events are held. You want to make sure that those meetings lived up to your expectations and your participants got what you were hoping they would get out of it. So ask them, what did you think of the meeting? What would you like to see a little bit different next time? And are you getting your desired outcomes? So, if you're holding enrollment meetings, how many people of the 20 that attended that meeting actually enrolled, right? If you're holding meetings, stressing the importance of saving more, how many people bumped up their contribution rates over the last 30 days or last quarter? So make sure that you're looking back after those events and seeing if they had some significant desired outcomes to them. And finally, with the website and messaging that goes out there, make sure your employees have an online account. They're utilizing those resources available. Which tools and resources are they using, right? And you need to educate them more on the ones that they aren't using. The targeted emails that your employee education provider is sending out, are those emails being read and are actions being taken? The one thing that we really can quantify are the click rates and open rates of those emails. So when we send out a targeted communication to employees via email, we want to make sure that close to a third or half of your employees are opening those messages. Click rates are usually a little bit lower because people are usually afraid of clicking links in an email. We don't blame them for that either, with the cyber crimes we see in this world. But those are some things that you can measure. Work with your service provider to make sure that you're taking accountability for all of that good stuff. All right, so we're running a little bit low on time, so I want to stop there and hand it back over to Tara, who's going to go over her benchmark considerations. Tara, take it away.
Thanks, Brian. And again, we are almost out of time and want to be respectful of that. So I had mentioned both of these earlier in my presentation, but you want to make sure that as a fiduciary, you know the true and total cost of the plan and that it's reasonable in light of the services that you're receiving. So you do need to annually look at fees and benchmark that to plans of similar size. The qualified default, your suite of investment portfolios or target retirement date funds, know what's under the hood, know how they compare the glide path to average in the industry, know how performance stacks up, how the diversification looks. And of course, with all funds in the lineup, you want to be looking at not only performance of the fund, but how our peers and benchmarks doing. And Scott, I'll turn it over to you for the last 2 or 3 minutes to wrap it up.
Okay, thanks, Tara. First of all, we have a polling question. When was the last time you benchmarked your plan's fees? So I'll let you answer that real quick. And then we'll talk a little bit about benchmarking and operations. So when was the last time? Within the last year, last 3 to 5 years, or not sure? We can help you with that. Okay, let's survey says within the last year. Oh, excellent. So, we have a majority have taken a look at this within the last year. And, Conrad Siegel clients, we help you with that every year. That's as Tara said, that's part of your documented fiduciary process. 3 to 5 years also, that's something you should certainly be doing every so often. Annual's probably better, but 3 to 5 years is good. And not sure, there's an opportunity for you. Going back to my backpack analogy, looking at those costs and making sure they're appropriate, possibly reducing them could also lighten your load and your participants' load going forward. So finally, I just want to talk about a couple real quick benchmarking things, and then maybe offer a minute or two to address any questions that have come across. Not going to read these. I think you can, but just some things you can talk about with your provider. One I will mention is my third bullet point on the left. I have actually done this. That's something you might need a provider for, but there is publicly available information out there on 5500 filings via the DOL's website. So you can actually look and see, you can read in audit reports what other plans are doing if you happen to be in competition with them. So there's a few things you can do. On the right, watch for the leaks. What I mean by that is where's the money going out of the plan? Maybe participants cashing out early instead of rolling over when they leave, or taking loans or distributions. So that's it. Something else I want to mention is in the survey that follows, there is that opportunity. There's a question relating to the opportunity for us to help you with a complimentary plan check. Now, we're more or less reviewing a lot of this benchmarking information if you are a Conrad Siegel client. But if you're not a Conrad Siegel client, that's something we can help you with, and we do offer that. So watch for that in the survey. And then just want to take a look over here. Looks like we had a couple questions. We have 2 minutes left. But one question we had that came in right at the end of my presentation is, what can we do to encourage former employees to roll over their balance? And I would just go back to a couple of things. One is, if you have that cash out provision in your plan for balances up to $5,000, use it. Talk to your provider, talk about how to structure that so you can take advantage of your ability to force participants with small balances to take a distribution. And for those who are over 5,000, maybe do a targeted mailing. Perhaps talk to your provider about how you can educate participants on their options for taking their money out of the plan. Perhaps, there's a lower cost option they could roll to if your plan pays all costs out of the plan. So there's certain things you can educate them on that you can't force them, but might encourage them. And believe that's all the questions we have. I do want to say the whole Hallmark Channel thing, I think I figured that out, but next time you watch a movie, note that there is nothing in those travel coffee cups. I wish they'd at least put water in them or something so that they're waving them around like batons. But appreciate you bringing that to our attention there, Brian.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Scott. And I know Zach, one of our panelists, asked what my favorite Hallmark movie is. For the record, Let It Snow, 2013, with Candace Cameron Bure.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, guys. It's a favorite, though, the family.
All right. So I'll turn it back over to Zach. Zach, do we have any final items here?
I think we are all set, Scott, but just want to thank everyone again for joining us today, and just thank our panelists again, Brian, Tara, and Scott. Really appreciate you guys. I work with you guys every day, and I come to something like this and I learn something from you guys. So really appreciate that, and really appreciate all of you today joining and just spending an hour of your time with us today. We really appreciate that. And just echo what Scott said, there will be a survey that pops up when you close this out. Let us know what you thought. If you think of any other questions, feel free to drop that in the survey. And the question we always get with these virtual events is this being recorded? Which it is, and we'll get this recording out to everyone that was registered for today within the next day or so. So we'll get that recording out to you as well. Feel free to share that around with others on your team. But with that, I think we will let everybody go to lunch. But again, really appreciate your time today, Brian, Tara, and Scott. Thank all of you, and have a great day, everybody.